Hi, this is Dan Bullard, retired electronics engineer, sitting on the front deck of my house. But again, that last video I made was pretty cool. But I want to talk about a couple things. I use the excuse, that Excel is easily accessible and stuff like that. Now, you can use Excel to do a lot of things, or you can go buy one of these, It's only like $7 million, If you buy a cheap one, you can probably get it for $1 million. But if you buy an expensive one, like the government probably did, and I've seen the government pay $4 million for a Genrad GR18, I think it was. $4 million, and that was back in the 1980s. So here it is, 2023. I bet it costs the government $7 million to buy a new Teradyne whatever. The Teradyne A585, that's a big machine, and that probably would bring $7 million. This is a Credence Quartet, and I know the gal who designed the skins for that. I was at Semicon, this Semicon, the one that I've showed you a couple of videos of it. At that Semicon, I was watching in between demos, because I basically spent my whole time doing demos. The female, I forget her name, but the woman who was in charge of HP for a little while, she was in charge of Agilent and HP and all that stuff. And she was walking down the hallway at the show, and she saw the Quartet. She says, what do ironing boards have to do with testing? Now, you got to admit, leaving it to a woman to come up with the idea that it's an ironing board. Well, who else would ever even know what an ironing board looks like? A woman. So she didn't last that long. But okay, so you can use Excel, which is coherent sampling, or you can buy a Teradyne or a Credence or a Vista Quartet, So you could buy any one of these things for a few $1 million, but, Excel comes a little cheaper than that, so it does sound, pretty ridiculous. Now, on that last video, I showed you the two waveforms. The waveform that Raytheon came up with, which it was terrible. They had to average the shit out of it, and they still got really screwed up numbers. 4 million samples, and they took 1,000 sample slices for so that's 4,096 cuts of 1,000 samples each. Average it all together, which you can do. That's mathematically likely. You can do that. And then they did average, and they got the CPKs weren't terrible, and you can look up CPK. I took 8192 samples. 8192. They took 4 million. I took 8192 samples. I did the FFT, and then I multiplied everything that wasn't bin 9 by 0. Everything, including bin 0. So then I did the inverse FFT, and what do you know? I got nothing but 10 kilohertz. How do you know that the 10 kilohertz is bin 9? Because I did the math. I set it up so that 10 kilohertz would always show up in bin 9. And how do you do that? You make sure that you get 9 cycles of the wave. That's it. That's all you got to do. You get 9 cycles of the wave. Not 9.1, not 10.3, not 8.9. You have to have it 9.0. No screw around. It's got to be an integer. If you don't have an integer number of cycles, you end up with having to do windowing. And when you have a spectrum analyzer, you have to do windowing, and then you can't do any of this stuff. So it took just 9 cycles of the wave, 8192 samples. I did the FFT, and then I went in and manually, with my math, I went in and multiplied in complex form. I multiplied everything that wasn't in bin 9 by 0. And then I took the inverse FFT, and guess what? Look at the peaks of this thing. They're exactly the same. Now, why is that? Why isn't there a DC offset? Because I zeroed the DC offset. I zeroed bin 0. I force it to 0. There's nothing in bin 0, so it can't have any DC offset. And that's a pure wave. I mean, even if that 10 kilohertz, let's imagine that 10 kilohertz was clipping somewhere. Imagine that. If it was clipping, it would create harmonics. Would you ever find out about it here? Nope. Nope. That wave is going to be a pure sine wave. So if you want to know about the harmonics, you better not zero those out. And since those would contain noise anyway, I don't want to see them. I don't care. That's not the test. The test was CMRR. Am I getting 10 kilohertz from this thing when I put 10 kilohertz on both the positive and negative input on an op amp? And the question is, do I have 10 kilohertz? Not do I have 10 kilohertz and 20 kilohertz and 30 kilohertz and 40 kilohertz. No, the question is, do I have 10 kilohertz? How much do I have? And so I do the FFT. I then zero out everything that isn't in bin 9, the 10 kilohertz bin. I set that up. It doesn't have to be in bin 9. It could be in any bin. But the beauty is, if you have 9 cycles, you get bin 9. The waveform shows up in bin 9. If you have 11 cycles, it shows up in bin 11. If you take 15 cycles, it shows up in bin 15. Whatever you want to do. And it doesn't have to be prime. I made a video about that. So it's really beautiful. You can do anything. You can do anything because you can do an FFT and then do whatever you want to the complex data and then do an inverse FFT and get the waveform back. It's really cool. So that's just, I wanted to mention that, you know, you can buy an expensive tester. You can spend $7 million on a tester, or you can spend, I don't know what it is now for Excel. I don't have a laptop, so I wouldn't know. But I don't think I've ever bought Excel in my life. But you could pay a lot less than $7 million for Excel. And Excel will do it. That's all you need. That's all you need. Swear to God. That's how I figured this out. And I've discovered 6 laws of physics. So, you know, let's imagine, you know, you could go out there and do the same kind of thing, you know. It could be you. You could do it. You could do all kinds of stuff. You just have to put your mind to it. Anyway, so once again, from the river, this is Dan Bullard. See ya.